for those of you trying to follow this, Kimberly Potter shoots Daunte Wright. Sergeant Johnson takes Potter's gun, gives Potter his gun. And then later on actually goes to Potter and asks Potter for his gun back, removes the ammunition, and then gives Potter his gun back. And so a lot of people heard Sergeant Johnson testify to this last week. And then this woman you see here is a state officer. She testified to that as well. But the big question is, why the gun swap? Ben, what would make Sergeant Johnson take Potter's gun? I know some people have said, well, because at that point it's evidence. Okay, that makes sense. But then why would Sergeant Johnson in turn give Potter his gun and then take it back and take the ammunition out of it and give it back to her?
It sounds like obstruction of justice to me. There's really no other way to cut it. There's no logical reason for him to have exchanged the ammo or to exchange the gun for that matter. You seize her gun and put it into evidence. That means you keep your gun. There's never an instance where a police officer has to exchange his gun in order to enter something into evidence. So I find that that argument to be specious at best. That said, this is just another example of the gang that is the policing agencies across this country. They look after each other. They have a no snitch policy. They were trying to do, from my best estimation, it sounded like this officer was doing everything he could to help Officer Potter on the scene.
Well, and as you're looking at the guns here that were collected into evidence, the state officer was examined by the prosecution. They asked her, can you recognize this gun? And she's like, oh, yeah, that's Potter's gun. And he said, well, take another look. In fact, it was Sergeant Johnson's gun. And so this whole gun swap following the fatal shooting of Daunte Wright has caused a lot of confusion with the evidence. And it just makes you wonder what the intent was. That's right. Behind the gun swap. You know, I've never heard of this. I've covered a number of officer involved shootings, and I've never heard of an officer at the scene. And not to say it hasn't happened, but I'm just saying I never heard of it happening where you swap out the guns. On the first, taking her gun as evidence, that totally makes sense. But I can't wrap my mind around what the need was for giving her his gun and then taking it back, taking the ammunition out of it and then giving it back to her. What was the reason of why she needed a gun at that moment? That's a difficult question. Now, when you there's some possibility as you explain it that way. I do see whatever rationale he tried to have, but that is me giving him and extending the most good faith that I can possibly extend. You understand what I'm saying? Because if they were not instantly sure that Potter was guilty of anything and they needed to seize a gun, I don't know. I'm working really hard here, Georgia, to make this make some sense. It doesn't. No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. Well, I want to take a listen to a clip from Special Agent Brent Peterson, who testified yesterday as well. Take a listen.
Right there.
Pause. What did you observe?
It appeared to me in watching this that there was a manipulation in some way of her holster.
Why would you do that?
It would just make drawing the firearm easier, more efficient.
Okay.
And so there you heard Special Agent Peterson testify that her holster had been manipulated, that it would make drawing her firearm easier. But yesterday, they also detailed the safeties that are on these holsters for both the taser and the gun. And I mean, it's the difference between an actual snap versus something that you're pushing or lifting. And so when you think about that, like cognitively, you're going through a number of steps in order just to get your gun or your taser out that are very, very different in nature that you would have to think about, including releasing the safety on your firearm before you shoot it.
Here's the other. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
George. No, I was going to say, as I'm listening to this and I'm listening to all the steps that went into it, it is far easier to believe that they made up this excuse of, oh, I accidentally used a taser after they realize what happened, because it is also very easy for us to understand that when Potter went up to that car, she was ready for action. She made sure that she could pull her weapon more efficiently. That to me states that she had a mindset. So I'm interested in seeing how the jury is going to interpret this exchange.
Well, I'll tell you what, Potter was red in court yesterday. There were several times. I know it's hard to see her on the cameras here, but the journalist who was in the courtroom sent me an email and said there were points where she was visibly red. She was extremely upset sitting there, having to watch that footage over and over again, listening to folks from the BCA and other officers detail the differences between a gun and a taser. They actually had a taser in the courtroom yesterday, and they were showing it to the jurors, showing them the different noises it makes, showing them the different weight that it is from a gun, all of these differences. And so I think yesterday was a turning point for the prosecution in terms of hard evidence that will help their case, that will help them convince the jury that this was not a mistake. However, what is going to be the defining moment in this trial is when Kimberly Potter takes that stand. If she's going to be able to convince these jurors that what happened was an honest mistake. But I'll tell you, Ben, it's going to be hard after yesterday. And it seemed like every single question the prosecution asked, there was the defense calling for an objection, and so much so that the judge was irritated with the defense, asking them to only have one-word objections. And so it got really heated yesterday, but I do think it was a turning point for the prosecution.
I'm interested in seeing how this is taken in, right? Because what is obvious to us, Georgia, and what is common sense and good faith interpretations by most oftentimes isn't common sense for those who are on the jury because of whatever reason, because of a convincing argument from the defense attorney or whatever the case may be, maybe instructions from the judge like we saw in the Rittenhouse case. But as we look at this, we clearly see the fact that there was something here happening more than a simple mistake. And even if it was a mistake, it was a mistake that took a young man's life, and there needs to be accountability.
And, as a journalist, I like to consider all things. And I feel like sometimes people, maybe think that means you're a conspiracy theorist or something. But I like to at least ask the questions. I like to examine all of the things that have been presented to me, all of the things that I've observed. Sometimes people don't present things, but you observe things. And as a journalist, it's your job to ask the question.
That's right.
And one thing I observed that I didn't really hear anybody asking the question about, and I'll have to dig through, and we can look at it tomorrow. But on one of the first days of the trial, there was body camera footage from the officer who originally pulled over Daunte Wright. And you could hear this conversation between him and Kimberly Potter as he was running Daunte's information. And there was this comment from Potter that made me ask the question, does she know him? She made the comment about the Wright brothers. And I wondered what she meant about that. And I know that there is famous Wright brothers, but, in this incident and her response after she said it almost felt like it had a double meaning. And so that it stayed with me, and it was just something I observed. And I'm not saying it means anything, and I'm not saying it doesn't mean anything, but I'm saying it was a comment that was made that I think people should be, and I hope the prosecution will circle back to that comment when Kimberly Potter takes the stand. And I hope they will ask her what she meant when she said that.
Yeah, George, I'd actually would certainly hope that they would explore that because we have to actually take in consideration, a lot of times police officers do know their victims. Take a look at George Floyd and the previous relationship that his murderer had with him. So I'll be interested in seeing how this all plays out.